Hey everyone, welcome to the fifth video in our introduction series, and for today we're going to tackle the topic about why should we reason and debate. So I got the philosopher in the house, Unsu, here, and I'm going to start the ball rolling with a quote from Aristotle, a philosopher. So the quote goes, "The fool tells me his reason, the wise man persuades me with his own." So let's start by first defining terms. What does it mean to actually reason? What do we mean by the word reasoning? Yeah.
I think the simplest way to think about reasoning is it's about justifying why you believe in something or why you're saying something. So if I say something like, I believe it's going to rain later this afternoon, and then you ask me, why do you believe that? I have to give reasons. Did I read it in a weather report? Do I feel something in the air? So at the most basic level, that's what reasoning is about.
So in philosophy courses, right, they always talk about the idea that there should be some kind of internal logic to a good argument, right? So what do you think makes, like a good argument when you encounter someone, say, giving a reason for something? What to you are the parameters or what are the attributes that constitutes that this person has come up with a good argument?
I think the first rule is non-contradiction. So like a statement should be internally consistent. Like it would just be nonsensical if I said, yeah, I believe that someone is wearing a red shirt because they're wearing a blue shirt. Like that is, so that's the first basic benchmark. And then I think relevance is a very important factor. Like the reasons I give should be relevant to the topic that we're discussing. Like if we're talking about something like climate change, and then I don't know, you're talking about the flavor of the ice cream. It just has no relevance to that, right? So those are the two that pop into my head as basic tests of good reasoning.
Yeah. So I also want to add on to that I think people may undervalue this unique capacity to reason, because as Aristotle said, as compared to animals, we are the only ones that are unique enough to be able to formulate reasoning. And in some sense, for philosophers and even political philosophers as well, like sometimes they attribute conflict or the kind of chaos that we experience within our societies to a lack of reasoning. And they believe that with better reasoning, we might be able to live much more meaningful or peaceful societies. And that's an interesting argument. You see many books that praises that tries to elevate the status of reason. Have you come across stuff like that, and what do you make of it?
I'm actually really skeptical about the value of reasoning and debate in society. I think I do believe that it is important for us to reason well, but I think it's still very unclear how that creates progress, because a lot of times I think people are much more motivated by emotions and just fundamental beliefs that, I think we first of all arrive at certain beliefs through intuition, and then we use reason to justify it afterwards. But I think in the long run, and you see it most clearly with science, right? That despite all these wrong turns and whatever and disagreements, that the general trajectory is that reason does allow us to agree on more and more complex aspects of reality. So currently the way I'm looking at reasons and reasoning is that they're almost like the feelers on an insect. They're just reasons are different ways of getting us in contact with the world. So when you give a reason, I may not necessarily agree with it, or it may not convince me, but the fact that you are giving this reason makes me at least pay attention to that feature of the world that you are looking at.
Yeah, so this actually comes to mind what I read from the social psychologist Jonathan Haidt, and I can't remember the book right now, but he does have this very powerful metaphor about the neuroscience of political differences, and I know that he has this idea that, which is very similar to what you said, that the reasoning is generally it's ad hoc, right? Like you usually react to something first, and when you react to, say, some kind of social issue out there, and a simple example could be like, say, the normalization of homosexuality as an example. People might have very strong visceral reactions to it, and the reasons that they give for whether being for it or against it, like those are formulated after the emotional state to begin with. That being said, I have come across debates on this where it's not as simple as what we said, as the way we explained it. Emotions are also in some sense cognitive, and the science behind this is really complex, so I can't talk about it too much here, but I'm at least of two minds about it. Like, I can see that, like, it's not impossible to take an emotional state and to be able to cognitize about it, and not necessarily, just because you have a negative reaction to something means that you're going to formulate very negative reasons to be against it. Like, there is a possibility, some exercise of free will, essentially, to, have, to come up with a contrary opinion, yeah, even though you may have a visceral dislike against this particular issue. How have you approached differences with, people around you? So let's say you're talking to someone, and you guys disagree about something very vehemently, right? Take an issue that you would like to bring up as an example. How do you approach it?
I think a lot of times I'm actually conflict avoidant. So sometimes if like an argument gets very emotionally heated, I might just choose to withdraw. But then sometimes you can't help yourself. It escalates. So as I said, I really do feel that we are driven more by emotions. But I would say my aspiration is to try and take what the other person says in the best interpretation possible. So like a lot of times when someone says something, we're just very dismissive, or we're thinking, how could you possibly say that? And it takes a little bit more effort to try and imagine, what is the best interpretation of that? It's almost like if I could take what you're saying and say it back to you, and then you say, oh wow, Unsu, like I never thought about that way. Thanks for, you've actually improved on my argument. That is the gold standard to me of trying to engage with someone whom you're having a disagreement with.
So I have a quote here that actually might sum up very succinctly what you just said. And the quote actually comes from Alan Alda, who's an actor. And I picked this quote up from his conversation with Neil deGrasse Tyson. He was talking about communication, and he said this: I don't think we're really listening unless we're willing to be changed by the other person. And I think that goes on a lot when we debate and when we reason with other people. If you really come in refusing to be changed, and it doesn't mean you have to change, obviously. I mean, you don't have to adopt that person's opinion wholesale, obviously. But if you come in already thinking that I'm going to reject everything you say, I'm not even going to give an ounce of leeway to even accepting the basic premises of your argument, then there's no communication at all. And there's no communication, obviously, even reasoning is not functioning in this context as well. Yeah. For me, how I would approach my own, how I've tried to approach my own discussions with friends is that I try to divide it into three categories. So facts, values, and beliefs. So I'm not going to try to be too strict with the philosophical definitions of these terms. I'm just going to say it in the way that I kind of define them. So obviously when it comes to facts, they're meant to be objective statements about a particular event of the world. So if I say I'm 1.8 meters tall, that's kind of a fact. It's, obviously it depends on the matrix system, me using the matrix system to measure my height, but the idea is that I can't be 1.6 according to this objective scale. And with facts, generally most people should be trying to have a consensus on this. If two people have different opposing facts, it's just way too hard to even start a conversation. That's what I feel. Yeah. Then when it comes to values and beliefs, obviously as you mentioned to me, there are propositions. So the way I look at values is that they're not things that you objectively find in the natural world. So a good example to me is like monogamy versus polyamory, and these are different styles of relationships. But right now there's a certain value that monogamy is a more virtuous thing than being in a polyamorous relationship. And that is a value. I mean, naturally you can find in the natural world people having all sorts of relationship styles, but we have to come up with reasons why this one seems to be better or more virtuous than the other. Yeah. And when it comes to beliefs, essentially they're kind of like attitudes about something that is true. So a very obvious example is God. If someone believes in God, it's a belief, it's an attitude that you have about the world, that there is a deity that exists. And with beliefs is another thing that it's hard to debate about, because if you can't find the facts to support the belief, then you've got to have it's harder to have a constructive discussion in that sense. So to sum up everything I said, right? So when I talk to someone, I try to look for the underlying factual basis for why the person might believe in something. So one good example I have is my friend who is a capitalist, and we have to discuss about the factual events that have happened, that have taken place due to capitalism, and we need to at least have that kind of consensus first. So if it's someone that doesn't believe, for example, that climate change is caused by anthropogenic events and definitely not due to capitalism's acceleration, then you can't even start the conversation going, and you actually have to work from that level first. Then after that, then we can talk about values and beliefs about like, okay, can we change the system? Is this system promoting values that we think is healthy for society? And that's how I find myself at least being able to make some headway in getting across to someone. And I guess so far that's the best approach I found. Yeah. So have you used such a template in your mind, or do you try to deconstruct and scrutinize someone's arguments that way, or do you have your own kind of framework?
Yeah, I don't know if I really use that framework, and one of the reasons is that like even something like facts is really up for grabs, right?
Yeah.
So let's say I think a lot of facts are just consensus based, and the truest facts are just the ones that have the broadest consensus. So take a very uncontroversial statement like the Earth is round.
Yep.
I assume that you believe the Earth is round. Now, if I would ask you, why do you believe the Earth is round? What would you say?
Yeah, so, wow. So here's the thing. I was going to actually add on about this, and it answers your question as well. I think that as human beings, we are not designed to memorize facts, like literally at the top of our heads. So you asking me this question right now, my simple answer to you is because that's the consensus of the scientists, right? We have also visual images of, obviously the Earth from outer space. So we have all this like empirical evidence to establish that the Earth is round. But you're right, like thousands of years ago, it wasn't believed to be the case. It was believed that the Earth is flat. And again, also by somewhat the scientific establishment of its time. So that's the interesting characteristic about facts. They can change. And in fact, the example that I thought of was like dinosaurs, one of my favorite stuff that I like to read on. Like, it was only very recently kind of established that dinosaurs have feathers. I mean, not too long ago, it wasn't thought of that way, that dinosaurs have feathers. And so that's another kind of evolved fact that we have to contend with about something that's, historical and at least, though we can't see and touch it right now in the present world, but we assume through the scientific work that's been done, this is a fact that we can accept. So I agree with you, like facts are not the best, instruments, in terms of trying to argue with someone.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why I bring up the Earth is round thing is just, obviously we read in textbooks, we see it from pictures, but if you keep drilling and go, okay, why do we trust the images that from our phone? I look it up on Google or whatever, why do we trust that, right? And then you can go even further and say, oh, because like the electronic signals get sent from somewhere, but you don't have to go very far before actually a lot of our facts are just relying on faith. Like I have faith that the technology works the way I think it works. I have faith that the scientists that I'm reading are telling the truth. I have faith that the textbooks, were not like just made up. I think there is like a lot of people use facts to try and justify things, but it's it's quite tricky.
So then how would you reach a consensus with someone if they really come in with a different set of facts? Do you feel like it's a done deal, like there's no way to try to make, try to meet in the halfway, or do you feel like you need to use some other kind of rhetorical devices to convince someone of the strength of your own arguments?
Yeah, I think when you have, let's say, complete disagreement on basic facts, I think what it does mean is that you just have to go back further, right? Like facts are just agreed on starting points of a conversation. So if, let's say, with your friend who is a capitalist, if let's say he had agreed that humans are causing climate change, okay, then you can use that as a starting point and go from there. But if let's say he doesn't disagree, then it just means you have to kind of take a few more steps back. And if at that point you're still not agreeing, then you have to keep going back until you find something that you can agree on.
Right. For me, how I've dealt in my conversations with him, and he's a close friend, so I use him as a good example, is that, like, for example, when it comes to economic issues, already he's someone that at least has a realistic mindset about what we can measure, what we can observe, from current day events. So that's much easier to deal with. But for example, like, I can't get into a debate with him about religion because he's a Christian, and I already from the outset don't even believe in God. And even if I could accept, that there exists a God, even I wouldn't accept necessarily that the God that exists is someone that is from the Christian text. It could be literally anything else. So I find that, at least for me, when I deal with such things, sometimes it's too hard, and I kind of leave that aside because I try to find common ground instead. And also, to some degree, I also want to understand, okay, for this other party, right, why is a belief in God so important? And in this case, there is a very personal event that's happened in his life, and I find that, like, there's no reason to reason about it because this person has, gone through something that's very deep and profound and transformational, and it's not up to people like me, to deliver, some kind of treatise on, the existence of God or the arguments for non-existence of God, because it's not going to change his mind because he has gone through something quite personal. And these are instances where reason actually doesn't seem to work because you have to kind of like understand that faith in this case has a much more powerful basis and gave reason for them to believe in something like that. So that's kind of how I've kind of treated it.
Yeah, I want to actually also present a very different view or angle on reasoning that I've recently come to explore. And this is because I think for most of us, we look at reason as a tool to arrive at the truth. And when we're arguing, we're debating, we have the hope that we can converge on something that is true and whatever, right? And there's actually there's a real possibility that reasoning isn't doing what we think it's doing. So like the purpose of reasoning, why reasoning evolved, there are a lot of different things. So like one intriguing idea that I came across through this guy, Gerald Callahan, he's an immunologist, so he studies immune systems, is that he actually thinks the mind evolved as part of the immune system. So we think of the mind as the immune system. Our actual immune system evolved to protect us against very small threats like germs and things that we don't want infecting our body, right? Now the mind evolved to protect us against larger things. So like when we have to be worried about predators like tigers or whatever, that the mind sort of can help us figure out what to do and all that, right? And so reasoning as part of the mind is actually it serves this defensive purpose. So which is why we all get very defensive a lot in arguments. Like when someone makes a critique against me, I actually feel like I'm being attacked or violated, right? And so that's why it is very difficult to change each other's minds, because if you think about it, if you think of the mind as like an immune system, it's just instinctive that you are gonna just protect yourself against all these threats. Every reason that I receive is like a threat that I have to put up a defense.
Does he provide some kind of solution to all this? Like how is it possible to reach across and to change someone's mind in that case? If everything being perceived is a threat, do we want a strategy where we de-escalate the threat, you know, like the discombobulating information that the person is receiving? Is that one way to go about it?
I don't think he gave a solution, but on my own, I've sort of realized that actually more important than the actual content of the reasons is just establishing a sense of safety, right? Like at the end of the day, we forget that we are nervous systems interacting with each other. So if I can calm my own nervous system down, and you know, and these techniques have nothing to do with reasoning. Like, you can't reason yourself into a calmer state. You have to like maybe meditate, use breathing exercises, you know, understand your own nervous system better. And if you can, you know, the other person can sense your calmness, and then they will be calm too. Another way to look at reasoning and language is that there's this guy, Robin Dunbar, I think he studies primates and whatever, and he has a theory that a lot of language actually serves the purpose of grooming. So if you look at monkeys, they're constantly plucking fleas or lice from each other's hair, and you know, they spend a lot of time touching each other, right? We human beings, we've gone past that. We no longer touch each other so much, but language in some ways have taken over that function. So half of language is actually not trying to arrive at truth. We're using it to comfort each other, soothe each other. So in some ways, if we can step back from being too focused on the content of what we're saying and focus more on how we're saying it, I think actually a lot of, like, I don't know, debates or arguments will be much more productive.
So you actually came up with a very strong explanation for one of the quotes that I wanted to deliver. And the quote goes like this. So this quote is from a leftist YouTuber or podcaster. His name is Michael Brooks. Sad to say he passed away about 2 years ago. But he had this very enlightening statement: be ruthless with systems, be kind to individuals. And this leads on to another way of how I see differences should be approached. So when I make a criticism, say about capitalism, and obviously my friend here is a strong supporter of capitalism, that's not a criticism of him as an individual participating in the system. And I think for a lot of people, they don't understand that, you know, when you meet arguments that, you know, criticize social practices, you know, systems, institutions, you know, we're not necessarily saying that sometimes the people in it, even though of course we're all complicit in some way or another, you know, in participating in these systems, but doesn't mean that we hold you personally 100% responsible. To some degree, that can differ from case to case, right? So maybe institutionalized racism would be one example, but the idea here is that, like, I find that going along with what you just said, that if you can establish some sort of rapport, that what I'm about to say may be very disorienting, maybe very disagreeable on an emotional level, but it's not about you. And I think that's really like a good first step to ensuring that, you know, you can have an amicable and, as you say, a productive discussion. And I find that that's always important to establish in any conversation, especially with someone of the opposite camp. Yeah.
And there's actually parallels to parenting. Like, you know, modern styles of parenting would say, you know, like when you correct a child or point out some behavior that you think they shouldn't be doing, you know, it's more about correcting the behavior and not making the child feel that they themselves have something wrong with them, right? And you can also translate that to like the criminal justice system, you know, like we, as a society, we want to punish the behavior, but not the person.
Yeah, so yeah, this is actually one of those things where, how would I put it? Like, you can see it with a child, like, there are things people want to do, like in order to, so when a child misbehaves, right? Misbehaves. When a child misbehaves, people naturally have this tendency to want to punish, and I think the reason behind it is that they want to establish authority, and that's the conflicting part about this whole relationship, because obviously you are the adult, so you have that natural sense of authority over the child. But to me, at least from the stuff that I've read from parenting literature, I mean, if you really want your child to develop to be an autonomous, self-thinking, independent individual, then you wouldn't want to go with this approach. You would actually want to try to reason with the child. And as limited as a child's reasoning can be, depending on their age, nevertheless, that's a much more optimal approach, because when it comes to the case of punishment, I mean, even to the child, there's a certain reasoning behind it. Like, okay, you're bigger than me, so you can apply force, but it doesn't mean I have to accept it, even though I have to accept it, but internally I don't. And I think that goes along, this analogy goes along with how we should approach, speaking to individuals and trying to work with them, to reach some kind of positive outcome. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought up this issue of authority, because I think actually reasoning and reasons are the opposite of authority. It's like, I could tell someone to believe me because I'm an authority figure. I'm like, a very high up person, like a lawyer or a CEO or, a bank president. But I much rather convince someone through just reasoning, so that when they do agree with me, it's out of more willingness.
So I want to talk about the role of criticism in society, and I actually wanted to start with a kind of template that actually comes from Dennett, the philosopher. So he had an essay where he answered the question, just how charitable are you supposed to be when criticizing the views of an opponent? And so he has some steps here, so I'm just going to read it out first, then we can discuss. You should attempt to re-express your target's position so clearly, vividly, and fairly that your target says, thanks, I wish I thought of putting it that way. So that's being charitable, right? Number 2, you should list any points of agreement, especially if they are not matters of general or widespread agreement. You should mention anything you have learned from your target. And number 4, only then are you permitted to say so much as a word of rebuttal or criticism, right? So what do you make of that, 4-step process?
I love it. I wish I actually do it. I don't think I've ever done it. And even if I have these rules in my mind, I don't know if in the moment when you're arguing with someone, I can actually remember, oh, okay, wait, first of all.
Right.
But I think as an aspiration, I think it's great. And maybe it really is just as a society, we have to collectively help each other reason better. I mean, if everyone around me actually followed those rules, it would actually be a lot easier for me to apply them.
Yeah, so one thing for sure is, do we even inculcate and teach this, right? So this is really one thing. I mean, I don't feel like our schools, our institutions actually promote this kind of practice. So there's really one level. To me, I feel like the other problem is that we actually look down on the role and the value of criticism in society. So to give you a good example, within the fitness industry, there's sometimes this quote that is thrown out from time to time. So when an athlete feels like, okay, I put in my best, even though they've been defeated, say, in a particular match, but their criticism is always around about the athlete, oh, you should have done this, you should have done that. And then this quote always gets thrown around that the critic is, has no bearing and no role to play to the person who is actually doing the actual work. And I kind of dislike that, because I get it from the athlete's point of view, from the practitioner point of view. Who are you to criticize me if you haven't done, if you haven't invested the same amount of work as I do? But that's not the role of the critic, right? So a good example to me is we have film and art critics. Now the film and art critics don't have to produce their own films, they don't have to produce their own paintings, but they can still provide a lot of rich analysis. They can also spot, maybe its flaws, inconsistencies that perhaps the practitioner didn't see. And I feel that kind of contribution shouldn't be taken for granted. I mean, if you devalue and if you, if you want to remove the role of the critic in society, then there is no way that works of art or an athlete's performance as well can then be scrutinized and be made to improve better, to get better and to evolve over time. Mm-hmm. So that's what I feel. At least that's the other problem that we have. Yeah.
I wonder if it's kind of related to something that Richard Feynman, the physicist, said. Like he said, a good scientist shouldn't just publish your good results. You should publish your mistakes as well. You know, because that's how we learn as a society.
So to kind of show you what I mean about criticism. So this is a quote from Winston Churchill, and it goes like this: Criticism may not be agreeable, but it's necessary. It fulfills the same function as pain in the human body. It calls attention to an unhealthy state of things. And that's the other thing about criticism as well, especially in Singapore, which is we also talk about like, don't complain lah, you know, why you complain so much? You go and do it lah, you know. So very Singaporean thing to say, right? Yeah. And I also think that's a problem as well, because say if I'm someone who's a minimum wage worker, like you cannot expect me to provide a policy solution to my plight, right? That's not the kind of societal expectations that is reasonably expected of me, yeah, you know. But at the same time, I have a right to criticize maybe the structure or, you know, the structure that I'm under, whether it's within my own corporate workplace or whether is it, you know, due to the national's policies on wage. So in any case, what I feel is that we should actually elevate and promote, you know, the value of criticism. And it's not like as if you've got to always provide a solution. It just matters that the criticism that you give is on good faith and it comes with good reasoning. So in any case, I'm trying to think of a way to end the video.
Have you heard of there's this anecdote about the Korean airlines when they were having a lot of crashes?
Oh yeah, please go through that. Yeah, please go through that.
They were trying to figure out how to improve the safety, right? And he brought in an expert, I think he was American and whatever, and after observing how they did things, he just had one recommendation, like your pilots speak in Korean, just get them to switch to English, and they did that, and overnight, like they had so much less crashes and whatever, their safety record just went up. And the reason is that what he observed is that in the Korean language, there's a lot of hierarchy and deference, right? And so when they were speaking in Korean, the assistant pilot, the co-pilot would never dare to challenge the pilot, the captain, even if he thought they were doing something like dangerous or whatever, right? But then when they switched to English, like English, they associate English with flatter hierarchy, and they were more willing to challenge. And that was the big change, you know. So in a way, that speaks to the importance of criticism. They just allowed a culture where, the subordinates could criticize their leaders, and you could see the results.
Yeah, I love that example because for one, it's a real case study. Two, it speaks a lot about how, we have all these ingrained cultural norms, as if like speaking up to our elders is a disrespectful thing. And it goes back to what we were talking about, how criticism doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be regarded like it's a personal insult to another person. It can really be a vehicle to improve social practices. And I mean, I think the more important thing, like we've mentioned, is ensuring that criticism and debates are conducted in forums or in spaces where people feel free to be able to do it without feeling like as if they have to they don't have to suffer a personal loss from that. Yeah, and that personal loss could be in terms of status, could be in terms of like tangible goods. But the idea is that they need to feel safe enough to give their input and to have vigorous debates. Yeah. What do you think should be the main takeaway for our viewers?
I don't know. I actually think we should just end this video with inviting our viewers to criticize us, as long as they follow Daniel Dennett's charitable rules of criticism.
Yeah, so keep those rules in mind, guys. And we look forward to your feedback. So this actually is the end of our introduction series. We are moving on to new projects, new videos after that, and we look forward to bringing new stuff to you.